What if suddenly the moon just disappeared? Without warning, without explanation, one day she is there, shining in the night sky, and the next disappeared without leaving traces. What would happen to the Earth? Would our planet remain the same, or would we be on the brink of chaos? You may not even realize, but the moon is much more than just an ornament in the sky. It directly influences life on Earth, controls tides, stabilizes the planet axis, and even influences the behavior of various species. But what if all this would disappear out of nowhere? In the first moments, the visual impact would be the most shocking. Looking at the sky and not seeing the moon would bring a strange and uncomfortable feeling. The nights would become absurdly dark, as the moon reflects sunlight and is the main source of natural lighting after sunset. In large cities, this might not make so much difference, but in rural areas, in the middle of the ocean, and in regions further from luminous pollution, the absolute pitch would take over. The starry sky would be much more visible, but this new cosmic landscape would come with much more drastic changes than just lack of lighting. The absence of the moon would immediately affect the tides. The oceans are directly influenced by lunar gravity, and without it, the tides would be extremely weak. This may seem like a small problem at first glance, but the tides are much more than just the water level in the sea. Integer marine ecosystems depend on this cycle to survive, and with dramatically reduced tides, several species of marine animals would be disoriented. Creatures such as sea turtles, crabs, and even some fish species that synchronize their reproduction with tidal cycles could be extinguished in a short time. But the impact of the moon goes far beyond the oceans. Our whole planet would be affected by its lack, and one of the most dangerous effects would be the loss of stability on the Earth's axis. Currently, the moon acts as a gravitational counterweight, helping to keep the Earth axis inclined by approximately 23.5 degrees. This angle is essential for the existence of the seasons as we know them. Without the moon, the Earth's axis would begin to oscillate uncontrollably over time. In the beginning, this might seem imperceptible, but over the years, the inclination of the Earth could change in a drastic way. At one end, we could end a planet where some regions would never see the sun, while others would be permanently lit. Have you ever imagined a summer that lasts years and a winter that never ends? And the changes would not stop there. The global climate would also suffer severe consequences. Without the moon stabilizing our planet, the climate system would become unpredictable, with more violent storms, uncontrolled hurricanes, and sudden temperature changes. The sea currents, which depend on the tides for their operation, would also be affected, causing a collapse in heat transport through the oceans. This would mean that some parts of the planet would be extremely hot, while others would become cold at extreme levels. In addition, the behavior of living beings would also change radically. Many animals depend on moonlight to hunt, migrate, and reproduce. Wolves, owls, night insects, and numerous other species use the moon as a natural guide. Without it, many of these species would decline, creating a ripple effect on ecosystems. Even humans would be affected, as studies show that lunar cycles influence sleep and even human behavior. Without the moon, the world we know would collapse. The Earth would lose its stability, the oceans would become unpredictable, the climate would become chaos, and even animals and humans would feel the impacts of this change. It seems like something out of a science fiction movie, but the truth is that the moon is an essential element to maintain the balance of our planet, and without it, life on Earth would become much more difficult, perhaps even impossible in the long run. Now I want to know your opinion. Which of these effects would be the scariest for you? Climate chaos, the lack of tides, or the sky completely dark without the moon? Comment down here, the moon is missing, if you think the disappearance of the moon would bring catastrophic consequences, or land would be away, if it believes humanity could adapt. I want to see what you think about this scenario. And since we talk about the disappearance of the moon, how about imagining another apocalyptic scenario? What if the Earth had two suns? What would happen to our planet? Click now on the video that is appearing on the screen and continue this journey by the unknown. Now I want to know about you. If the moon disappeared, what do you think would be the worst impact on Earth? The total darkness, climate chaos, the collapse of the tides? Comment below down your opinion and tell me if you think humanity could survive without the moon. Hold there, because now we will understand exactly how the climate of the Earth would collapse without the presence of our moon. The moon disappeared. But what would change immediately? Would we notice the effects in the early hours, or would everything look normal for a while? The impact of losing the moon would be much greater than just looking at the sky and noticing a void where there was a silver shine before. The moon has a gigantic influence on the Earth, and as soon as it was disappeared, changes would begin to manifest in surprising ways. Some immediately, some over the next few days and weeks. The first change we would notice would be the extreme darkness at night. The moon reflects sunlight and illuminates the Earth, being our main source of natural lighting when the sun sets. Without it, nights would become deeply dark, something many people have never really experienced. In large cities, this would not make so much difference, as light pollution would keep the streets lighted artificially. But in rural areas, the open sea and in wild regions, the absolute dark would take over. Night trips would be much more dangerous, as visibility would be drastically reduced. This extreme darkness would affect the life of night animals. Many of them depend on the moonlight to navigate, hunt, and orient themselves in the environment. Wolves to the moon, but what if it was disappeared? Insects, birds, sea turtles, and even large predators like jaguars would be completely disoriented. Migratory birds that use the moon and the stars to guide could lose their way and end in the wrong places. The reproduction cycle of several species that depend on the lunar cycles would collapse. This would create a ripple effect in the food chain, causing unpredictable environmental imbalances. But the most drastic impacts would begin to occur in the oceans. The moon is responsible for controlling the tides of the Earth through its gravitational strength. Without the moon, the tides would become much weaker and more unpredictable. Coastal regions that depend on tidal flow to renew ecosystems would begin to feel the effects immediately. Lakes and estuaries that depend on tides to maintain balanced salinity would begin to die. Some beaches that suffer direct influence of the tides would completely change, altering the coastal geography in a matter of days. Tidal changes would also affect the global climate. The tidal movement helps distribute heat through the planet as it influences ocean currents. If the moon disappeared, these currents would be weakened, resulting in changes in ocean temperature. Some areas would be much colder, while others would become much warmer, creating unexpected storms and destabilizing climatic patterns that remained the same for thousands of years. Another impressive effect would be on human behavior. Studies suggest that the moon can influence people's sleep patterns and behavior. Although this effect is not fully understood by science, many report difficulty sleeping or irregular sleep patterns on full moon nights. Now imagine how our body would react if the moon disappeared completely. Perhaps this would trigger biological uncontrollable, affecting the hormones and circadian rhythms of millions of people around the world. Now imagine the global reaction to realize that the moon has disappeared. It would be an unprecedented phenomenon in the history of humanity. Social networks would explode with conspiracy theories, the media would go into a frenzy state, and scientists would desperately try to understand what happened. Religions would interpret the disappearance of the moon in different ways, and millions of people could believe that this event is a sign of the end times. But these would be only the first visible consequences. In the coming days and weeks, the effects of the absence of the moon would become even more intense and dangerous, threatening the stability of our planet in ways no one could predict. What would happen to the climate of the Earth? How would our planet behave without the gravitational influence of the moon? This is what we will explore next. Now I want to know about you. What would be the scariest impact of the disappearance of the moon? Do you think we could adapt to the total darkness? Or would it be the collapse of the oceans that would bring more devastating consequences? Comment here below. Darkness would be the worst, whether you think the moonless sky would be terrifying or chaos in the oceans would be worse. If you believe that climate and marine change would be the most devastating. Without the moon, would the Earth continue with the same seasons of the year? Would the climate remain stable, or would we be facing a global climate catastrophe? The answer can be much more scary of what you imagine. The disappearance of the moon would not only be a curious astronomical event, but the beginning of a devastating transformation on the planet. This is because the moon plays a key role in the stability of the Earth. It acts as a gravitational balance, maintaining the axis of rotation of our planet stable over the millennia. Without it, we would be completely vulnerable to cosmic forces that would try to destabilize our planet, and the impact of this on the global climate would be catastrophic. In the first months after the moon's disappearance, the climate of the Earth would still look relatively normal, but little by little, small changes would begin to manifest. The absence of lunar gravitational force would cause our planet's axis of rotation to begin to oscillate unpredictably. This means that the Earth's angle of inclination in relation to the Sun would not be more fixed in 23.5 degrees that guarantee the regularity of the seasons. Without this stability, the Earth's axis could vary between extreme inclinations, and this would drastically change the global climate. Now imagine a world where summers become unbearably warm, while winters are long and freezing, looking for small ice ages. In some periods, some regions of the planet could be illuminated by the sun for 6 months in a row, while others would be in total darkness for months or even years. This oscillation would cause Earth's geographical poles to change position over the centuries, directly affecting the distribution of temperatures and climatic patterns. If the inclination of the Earth increased a lot, we could face an even more chaotic scenario. At times, certain regions could be permanently focused on the sun, resulting in torrid deserts and unbearable temperatures. Meanwhile, the opposite side of the planet could be plunged into constant darkness, freezing such low temperatures that they would make life impossible. Have you ever imagined what would happen if tropical countries, such as Brazil, suddenly turned into scorching deserts, while regions such as Europe or North America were buried by permanent sparkles? The collapse of biodiversity would be inevitable. In addition to extreme seasonal changes, the behavior of sea currents would also undergo severe changes. Ocean currents play an essential role in regulating the global climate, carrying heat between different parts of the planet. Without the moon and its strong tides, the ocean currents would be stagnant, preventing heat from being distributed efficiently. This would result in abrupt climate change, with massive storms occurring in places that once had a milder climate. Monstrous hurricanes could become frequent, reaching places that had never faced such phenomena before. And don't think the effects would stop there. The melting of the polar hubcaps, driven by uncontrolled oscillations of the Earth axis, would increase the level of the sea to alarming rates. Entire coastal cities could be submerged in a matter of centuries or even decades. Desertification would also spread unpredictably, transforming fertile lands into arid landscapes and eliminating any chance of planting. The collapse of agriculture would hunger on a global scale, making humanity's survival increasingly difficult. But perhaps the most terrifying effect of the disappearance of the moon is the total uncertainty about the future of our climate. With the Earth's axis oscillating uncontrollably, the weather forecasts would become virtually impossible. Today, we know exactly when winter begins, when spring brings milder temperatures, and when summer reaches its apex. But without the moon, we could get into an age of climate chaos, where no one could tell if a particular year would be a scorching summer or a freezing winter. This would make survival even more difficult, as humanity could no longer prepare properly for seasonal changes. And if you think the Earth could recover over time, think again. Our planet would take millions of years to adapt to the new reality. And in the meantime, human life would become increasingly fragile. We would have to develop extreme technologies to protect cities from extreme cold or scorching heat, find new ways to cultivate foods in inhospitable environments, and seek alternative energy sources to protect us from natural disasters that would become increasingly unpredictable. Now stop and reflect. What would it be like to live on a planet where the weather can dramatically change from year to year? Where can winter last a decade, and summer can turn the soil into a burning desert? Would you be able to survive in a world without defined stations? Comment down here. I would go to climate chaos. It is thought that humanity could adapt, or it would be impossible to live like this if this scenario would lead to the total collapse of civilization. With so many changes, would humanity have a chance to adapt, or would we be walking for extinction? The disappearance of the moon would not be just an isolated astronomical event. It would transform the way we live, threatening our resources, our infrastructure, and even our ability to predict the future of the planet. The impact would not be immediate, but as the months and years passed, the signs that the Earth was becoming an increasingly hostile world would begin to become evident. The big question is, would we be able to survive these changes? The first major threat would be the collapse of global agriculture. Without the moon to stabilize the Earth axis, unpredictable climate change would cause the seasons to become chaotic, making it impossible to predict when to plant and when it reap. Regions that were previously fertile could suffer intense heat waves, drying entire crops and turning agricultural fields into deserts. In other parts of the world, extreme, prolonged cold would kill plantations before they could develop. Without a reliable climate pattern, food stocks would decrease rapidly, leading to global food shortages. In addition, the disappearance of the moon would affect plant pollination. Many species of night insects, such as moths and some bees, use moonlight to orient themselves. Without this point of reference, its activity would be drastically reduced, directly impacting plant reproduction. This would mean that fruits, vegetables, and grains would have a compromised growth, further reducing our ability to produce food on a large scale. The result would be an agricultural collapse, leading to devastating fames that could cause resource wars and accelerate the decline of civilization as we know. Another big problem would be navigation and satellites. For centuries, humans used the moon as a point of reference for navigation, especially in the sea. But more than that, the moon also influences the orbits of the satellites we use for communication, GPS, and weather forecast. Without its gravitational influence, many of these satellites could leave their orbits over time, making global communication unstable. Without reliable satellites, we would lose much of our ability to predict hurricanes, storms, and other natural disasters. This would make the world an even more dangerous place, as governments and populations could not prepare properly for natural disasters. In addition, the interruption of communication systems could cause economies to collapse, making financial transactions, supply logistics, and even the organization of entire societies difficult. But the effects of the disappearance of the moon would not only be physical, they would change even the way we live and relate to the environment around us. Nightlife would never be the same. The moon has always been part of our culture, our science, and our history. It inspired myths, religions, calendars, and even the development of the first civilizations. But more than that, its light plays a key role in the way many cities and ecosystems work. With the disappearance of the moon, the nights would become much darker, and this would directly affect human safety and behavior. Cities that previously depended on lunar shine to complement their artificial lighting would have to consume much more energy to compensate for darkness. This would increase electricity costs and have an even greater environmental impact. Rural regions, on the other hand, would be plunged into total darkness, which could increase crime rates and make nightlife much more dangerous. Human beings have always had a deep relationship with the night sky, and the moon has always been present in this scenario. With its absence, there would be a gigantic psychological impact on our society. Many people would feel an inexplicable void, as if something fundamental was missing. The full moon has always been associated with natural cycles, festivals, beliefs, and even human behavior. Without it, humanity would feel more disconnected from the universe, which could generate anxiety and even psychological disorders in some people. Now imagine the impact of this on future generations. Children born after the disappearance of the moon would grow without ever seeing it in the sky. For them, stories about the moon would look like fiction stories, something their parents and grandparents speak, but they could never witness. This would completely change our relationship with the cosmos and could reduce interest in spatial exploration. After all, the moon has always been one of the first goals of HU-Manage in space, serving as a trampoline for future missions. Without it, the enthusiasm for the exploitation of the universe could decrease, and the search for new spatial borders could be set aside. But would humanity find a way to adapt? Would we be able to develop technologies to compensate for the absence of the moon? Perhaps, with advances in climate engineering, we could create systems to artificially stabilize the Earth's axis. Perhaps new cultivation methods were developed to overcome the difficulties caused by the unpredictable climate. And perhaps we could even use satellites to simulate the effects of the moon and avoid the complete collapse of tides and ocean currents. But the big question remains, would all this be enough? Or would we be doomed to the decline, facing an increasingly inhospitable and unstable world? Now I want to know from you, if the moon disappeared, could humanity be adapted or we would be condemned? Comment down here, we would survive without the moon, if we think we would find a way to overcome this challenge, or we would be condemned if you believe it would lead to the collapse of our civilization. If you got here, congratulations. You are part of the group of cosmic explorers who really want to understand the mysteries of the universe. Now tell me, if the moon suddenly disappeared, do you think humanity could survive, or we would be condemned? Comment down here, the Earth would still survive if we believe we could adapt, or it would be the end of the planet, whether it would lead to total chaos. And look, here is already appearing a video that will explode your mind. What if the sun went back suddenly? Click now and continue this journey by the unknown.